so excited to be here. I was so excited when Pencil asked me if I would be able to moderate this. I've been a big admirer of Pencil for the past 4 years as an education reporter at New York One. Before that, as I was reporting at Inside Schools. And before that, I was a teacher in Washington Heights in a very large, very high poverty middle school for 2 years. And I knew about Pencil right then, and I saw its work in the schools. And I also saw how important these kind of partnerships could be, because teaching is by far the most difficult thing I've ever done. And I know it will probably be up there with one of the most, if not the most difficult things I ever do. And it's almost impossible to do alone. So the work that you do is so important. And so in terms of where we are right now, as Michael mentioned, we're facing a huge sea change. New York City and state, and actually the rest of the country, but New York is really at the forefront, in large part because of the work Merryl's done, in implementing the new Common Core national standards. And we have a new teacher evaluation and principal evaluation system that is going online for the city this year as well. So those are just, we're changing what we're teaching, and we're changing how we're evaluating the teachers all at once. And at the same time, halfway through the year, we're going to have a completely new leadership of the city schools. And it will change over. It's a funny thing. January 1st is not an odd date necessarily for most other city agencies, but for the school system, it's a really strange time to switch leadership because it's halfway through the year. And that's going to happen during this year when we have so many other huge, huge changes going on. So it's a really interesting time, and I think it's wonderful what Pencil's doing, how they're having these conversations and kind of making the shift towards focusing in these areas where you as business leaders and educators can come together to make this lasting, meaningful change that you've been doing for years, but now it's so focused. So on to the discussion, because we have such fantastic panelists here to talk about all of these issues. Thank you, all three of you, for sitting down with us today. So I want to start with Common Core, and Merryl, we'll start with you. Since New York State is going forward with this much faster than the rest of the country, Merryl, 3 minutes or less, what is the Common Core?
Yeah, right.
Lightning round.
Okay. So about 6 or 7 years ago, we were noticing a trend. I'll make New York City our case study. We were noticing a trend in our community colleges. We saw graduation rates going up in the city school system. We saw passing rates on Regents exams, which are the exit exams to get out of high school in New York State, consistently going up. And yet we saw when kids were getting into, or now young adults, were enrolling in our 2-year colleges coming out of city high schools, 70% of them needed to be remediated in either English language arts or math. Let me explain what that means to you. Kids were paying, and families were paying, college tuition for high school work. And so we took on this very unenviable task of revealing that even though we can talk about how well our students, we were talking about how well our students were doing, we were going to at the same time reveal what it really looked like if they were judged by a standard of either college or career ready. And so instead of having a graduation rate of 64% or 65%, when you unpack New York City's data, the truth is that only 32% are graduating college and career ready. That is a huge, huge delta. Along the same time, there was a new administration in Washington who started to talk about raising standards for students throughout the system, and these became known as the Common Core standards. And in an alignment with the Common Core standards and the rollout of Common Core standards, it was also established that we needed to produce a working force in the teacher force who are capable of teaching to this new standard. Hence, we have the rollout in New York State, the simultaneous rollout of the higher standard for teachers, a higher standard for students, known as Common Core, married in a timeline to a rollout of an evaluation system for teachers. Now, you are all hearing a lot of drama about the rollout of Common Core and how unfair it is and how complicated it is. And yes, I would say it is a huge task for the system to undertake. But I would also postulate to all of you here today that if we were not rolling out the evaluation system at the same time as we were rolling out the Common Core, there would be less anxiety and drama. We understand that at the state level. We have gone to the federal government and we said, listen guys, we are really at the forefront of this change. But what we really need to do is hold our school districts and our schools harmless while we undergo this change. And we've asked the federal government for a waiver in identifying schools and school districts based on the new Common Core standards. I would also say to you that as the implementation of the evaluation system takes hold, what you all need to know is that we released the data last week. 91% of the teachers in New York State under the new evaluation system came out at a bar of effective or highly effective. And I think the same number held true for principals. We are looking, what the evaluation system is, we are not playing a gotcha game with teachers or principals. What we are trying to do is drive professional development dollars to produce a core of teachers who will be able and prepared to teach to this new standard. And I beg all of you in this room today not to allow the rhetoric to overtake the importance of the work. We're going to give this time, we're going to give this a huge runway, and we're going to work together to make this work, because that's the right thing to do for New York State, and it's the right thing to do for teachers, it's the right thing to do for kids, and it's the right thing to do for our citizens.
So Kathy, the business has been a major supporter of the Common Core.
Men last.
Oh, I'm fine.
I'm going to come to the educators. Don't worry. So business has been a major supporter. Why has that been? Why is Common Core seen as something that the business community is gotten behind and wants to get behind?
Well, for a number of years, and I don't think Common Core is any different, the business community has championed the standards movement in the schools, and it's really to recognize that the American public education system over the last 2 generations has fallen behind, that in a global economy we're in international competition to develop a skilled labor force that can be effective in competing in the knowledge economy. Employers have found that the education system, much as Merryl described the problem with having to remediate kids, high school graduates, the education system is not preparing kids for the demands of the 21st century workforce, particularly in the STEM area. And as a result, employers have really focused on this. This is the number one attraction of employers to, whether it's to a community or whatever, it's not incentives, it's talent. It's the skilled talent pool, and that's what they're looking for. So I think in terms of what Pencil is doing now in terms of focusing on the integration and understanding that standards are important and employer engagement is equally important, and that's been kind of their mission. That's what we're seeing now as an opportunity, and I think most employers are recognizing that. The P-Tech is a great example, the IBM school, but also Con Ed was describing to me how they couldn't find, they traditionally hired New York City high school graduates for their entry-level employees. And they said over the last decade, they've had a harder and harder time finding qualified high school grads. And as a result, they've created a parallel school called Energy High to P-Tech in the Bronx. And so you've got a lot of activity going on, starting to go on by employers paying attention to schools. You've got examples here like JetBlue that's been involved with aviation high, but there's a lot more opportunity. And I think the engagement of employers in the schools, not only in pursuit of the high standards movement, but hands-on engagement in helping prepare the faculty, the students, and working hand in hand with the principals to really get kids to up our numbers on career and on career readiness, which are dismally low. To up those numbers is the most important joint effort of Common Core together with initiatives like Pencil.
Thank you. So Ernie, I know that you've been a supporter of Common Core in theory, and as a framework for a while, but there's been concerns with implementation. Is that fair? And let's start with the positive. What do you see?
I hear you, Lindsey. I promised I wouldn't misbehave this morning. But I'm going to work up the crowd. I appreciate the work that the Chancellor has said, and I appreciate the work that the partnership has done, bringing this together. I was a real champion of Common Core because I believe that we need to have a set of standards that worked around the country. So as an educator, I was getting students who were coming from somewhere else who were so behind what we were doing in New York City, and then our students were going other places and they were so ahead of what other people were doing. So when I heard about this idea of a Common Core standard, I said, oh, this sounds good. And there was really nothing wrong with the idea of doing this. The problem became, number one, when we started to say, okay, the only way to get Race to the Top money is that you had to agree to do this. Without anybody working out the bugs yet. Does it work on the ground? As an educator, I think what you'll find from educators here, our concern is we're asked to do something that's not tried and true, and we're being held accountable for it when it hasn't worked through. So I appreciate the fact that we need to let it roll out a bit, and I appreciate the fact that the state is now saying to the feds, let us not hold our children accountable for things that we haven't quite done yet. That's critical. The problem is that we have not brought in our community to buy into this. And if you heard what some of the parents have been saying, not just in New York State, but around the country, they're saying no one has really explained this to us. One of the biggest problems that we have and the challenges in education is that somewhere we're very, very poor at doing the communications that needs to be done in our school communities. We're not good at it. We take it for granted. I'm the expert. I know what I'm doing. Everybody just follow along. So that has become the challenge. How do we now get people to buy into something that, as educators, believe, great idea. But the issue is, let us not do harm to children. And at this point, we have children who, because of the way we roll this out, the way we've communicated this, who feel distress. Parents feel distress. We can clean this up. But we need to all take a back seat, and we need to keep saying, as the Chancellor said today, what this really is. And not thinking that this is the death knell of public education. Because, yes, we've had higher graduation rates than we've ever had. And yet our children are not doing well at the college level. But is that what we're doing in school, or how we are preparing our educators to prepare our children for the next level? And I always question when we say college and career readiness, because I don't know what that means. And nobody else can give me a definition of what college and career readiness means. And so we need to have that conversation, I think. And so I thank Pencil for a critical thing that's happened here. When Lisa started this, no one talked about bringing business into education. But as an educator, she realized that we needed to churn this up a bit so that people became involved. And the genesis of Pencil was to get business people into schools to see what we needed. And I'll tell you, the first time Pencil ever met, the first thing people talked about, oh my God, look at these buildings. I don't know if you remember those first meetings. Business people came back and said, I don't believe that we're teaching our children this way. And that was the first thing to get a real capital plan. I don't know if Kathryn remembers, we really fought in Albany to get capital dollars. Then we said, let's work on helping school leaders become better managers. Because I'm going to be honest with you, I'm an educator. Now I'm a union president, I've learned to be a real executive. But I feel much better. Last week I was in schools and I was working on Legos with kids, and the kids were showing me and teaching me, and I was teaching them. That's where my heart is. But I understand to be a school leader, you have to have all of those skills. You have to have a toolbox that helps you do all of those things. Bringing Pencil into this gave us the other piece. So now we're looking at, we've done this, we're getting better. How do we now get everybody on the same page? And that's where Common Core can be really effective of doing that. But we need to understand it should not be just about testing to see if we're doing well. How do we bring in the portfolio stuff? How do we bring in the consortium schools and their old idea of how they're not doing testing? So we need to understand that it's not one for everyone, but one standard, and then how do we go about teaching that standard and getting it together?
So I want to, something you said about in the beginning about the communication of this, and this is an interesting point from my perspective because about a year before this rolled out, there was a lot of talk to the press, the education reporters about we've got to get the word out on this, we've got to communicate, and then we as reporters have gotten some flack from, probably fairly, from people in the public saying, you haven't told us enough about this, there isn't enough conversation going on about this. Is the communication piece and the surprise and now how people are saying, we didn't know about this and this is such a huge change and this is so difficult, is that partly just because New York State is one of the first to do this? Or do you think that it was actually a failure? I mean, people have a hard time a year in advance of something actually talking about it publicly.
Lindsey, I don't think it was a failure. I think it's the way we communicate things. We take a lot for granted. We say, okay, I'm a classic example, a lot of principals in the room. You say, well, I sent the notice home to the parent. And the parent comes up 2 days later and says to you, I didn't know this was going on. And what do we take for granted? Say, well, didn't you read the notice? There are multiple ways that we need to communicate, not one way. And I think what we're seeing now is that many of our schools, they have a Facebook page. They do emails. They do the robocalls. They send a backpack. They have this meeting. They have that meeting. We used to only have PTA meetings in the afternoon. Then we found that everybody was working. So now we try to do them on Saturdays. Some of us do them on Sundays. Some of them do them at night. We do them twice a month. Why? It's about constantly getting the community to buy in. When we're going to be successful is when we get people to buy in what we honestly believe. But we need to be transparent about what it is that we're doing. And we can't take for granted that people will just follow us because we're the educators. And that's the problem here. So I think that the point was to take a pause. Let's see if we can now get everybody out together, get rid of the rhetoric, yes, the craziness. We're not killing children all of a sudden because you failed. Because that's the problem that people have. So now my children are going to be held back. And the angst that my members started expressing when they first gave these tests, and the kids would say, oh my God, we can't read this. It's like, I told everybody, take a break. Let's see if we can work this out. And to the Regents' credit, they said, you know what, we hear you. Let's see what we can do about getting that waiver from the federal government. That's the critical piece.
Merryl, the waiver is, you've always said that you're going to not hold students and educators, or going to try not to hold students and educators responsible for the shift in standards. It's meant to help them rather than be a gotcha moment. That said, you've also said we can't afford to put on the brakes, and that we're not going to retreat in any way, that New York is going ahead and we're going to keep going ahead. How do those two kind of contradictory things fit?
So one of the things that we were seeing, again, I want to use New York City as an example. I spend a lot of times in schools in New York City, also across the state, but for our purpose, say New York City. And I noticed if you talk to principals and teachers, there is enormous anxiety. There's enormous anxiety about what's going on with two specific populations within the city school system, the English language learners and the special ed kids, and what Common Core will have, how Common Core will impact them. And also, I think rightfully so, teachers understanding that now there was going to be an evaluation, which is being talked about in real public space, are becoming very hesitant about how to incorporate these students into the new Common Core standards and the new evaluation system. And so schools and school districts around the city are not that crazy about embracing learning challenges and language issues. So We are watching this very carefully, and one of the things that we announced, I think on Thursday or Friday, I can't remember, is that we are going to also, part of the testing system that we are responsible for administering at the state level is really federally mandated. And they mandate certain regulations around the testing of English language learners and special education students. Our case to the federal government is going to be, if you really want us to roll out Common Core, and you really want us to roll out an accountability system for teachers along with Common Core, we're going to need to re-examine the federal mandates around testing kids with limited English proficiency and special education students, because we know that that represents well in excess of a third of the students in the New York City public school system. And so we are going to be looking for accommodations to this along the way that makes sense. We are going to be adjusting in many ways where people show us what needs to be adjusted in ways that make sense. But if you want, and that is actually responsible public policy. Policy that is not permeable to change is a failure. If you want policy to succeed, you have to be able to adjust it. But adjust it is different than declaring a moratorium. I have always been in favor of making adjustments and changes. I cannot sit here and say that I can support a moratorium. The urgency for our students is really clear. They are not getting a second bite at the apple if they come out of high school unprepared for either college or career. Their time is now. And I would say to the people who really are pushing a moratorium that what they are doing is they are playing with the lives of a generation of students. Our urgency is for today, is for now. Our urgency is also to make this a workable system. But we cannot allow ourselves to be pushed back to a system that we know excluded 70% of the kids along the way. And I would urge you to really listen very carefully and ask appropriate questions when you hear that what we are doing is harmful to teachers, students, principals, and families.
You know, one thing I want to say one thing about, I think that this conversation is typical of what kind of a bubble educators are in and the education community is in. In terms of employers, it's the results that count. And the Common Core discussion and the moratorium and the this and the that is really insider baseball. It's the education community talking to each other. But for the rest of the world, it's time to get on with things. And so I think whatever you have to do in terms of waivers or whatever is important, but that our conversation, if you want to engage employers, has to go back to what are we going to do? There's 375,000 people unemployed and looking for work in New York City today, and there are 92,000 open jobs that they don't have skilled people to fill. So there's an immediate opportunity to do something together. Over the next 7 years, there's going to be a 21% increase in the jobs in New York City that require an associate's degree or more from kids. We just have to get on with the business. It's the only way the city's going to stay competitive. It's the only way we're going to overcome the skills gap and the income inequality issue is if we're working together to fix this. And whether you call it Common Core or something else, the proof is in the pudding. What comes out the door is what's important, and that's what we all should be working on, I think.
I'm happy you said that because one of the things that CSA was very instrumental in is when Stan Letow approached us about doing P-TECH. He said to me, can you bring some educators together? Let's talk about what we would do building a STEM school from the ground up. So I brought some of the people in this room were at that initial meeting, had a conversation of how to do a P-TECH. We heard what the business was looking for. And that's a piece I always talk about, Kathy, that what we don't seem to have enough of is hearing what the industry needs. and then having the industry come into our house. Yeah, we live in a bubble, because we're educated. Nobody does it like we do it. And we don't always think we can learn from others. But this P-Tech is a wonderful example of how this can work. Because they told us what they needed now in the industry, but what they're willing to do is that as the industry changes, they will come back and help revamp how the curriculum is being rolled out, what is being taught. And that's what we need from industry, because the industry evolves. And I use the analogy of high school. We have an automotive high school. Talks about cars. Well, if we're not training kids on electric cars and the cars of the future, then what are we doing? Why are we wasting our time? The industry knows what's next. We should be training our students on what's next. Yeah, they should know what's happening now, but if you want them ready for your industry, you should be training them for what's next, not what is now. And I think the problem that we have here is that we're somewhat afraid to allow people into our bubble. And I think the people outside are saying, well, I don't know if I really want to do this. That's why an idea like a pencil is important. That's why a P-Tech is important. That's why what Con Ed is doing is very important. But we have to understand. Grid. Yes, I'm sorry. But also the missing piece here, folks, is that we're not pushing the universities to take a real big piece in this also. Because they're sending us teachers who are ill-equipped to do the things that we need teachers to be able to do. And, oops, I touched a nerve. But we can't do it on our own. It's everyone working together. So in going forward, it's an interesting opportunity for this city. Yes, this is the first time ever we're going to have a chancellor that the mayor will select. January 1, the mayor has an opportunity to select the chancellor.
Why is that the first time ever?
First time ever.
Didn't Michael Bloomberg select Joel Klein?
But it was a different process. Very different process.
I must have been sleeping in that one.
Because
I'm interested in this too. What do you mean?
It's January 1, it's mid-year.
It required a waiver.
And he required a waiver. Thank you.
Because you're saying de Blasio has
said that he would like to have
that he will choose an educator.
I don't go too much by what people pledge to do. I like to see what people do. So this is going to be a very interesting time, because we could have someone who comes in and says, you know what, I like what I see, but I'm moving it all. Or I don't like what I see. You never know. You have a new mayor. You have a new, almost a brand new city council. Almost a brand new city council. Many of them who have had issues about being disenfranchised in their own community. So there's a lot of issues there. The point being, the reason I bring that up is because it's a unique opportunity now for business and the universities and educators to come together and say, we have a plan for what can happen in our schools, and whether we need to all come together and decide what we think is best going forward and share that. And if not, somebody else is going to do whatever the political side is or whether the community side is. But ultimately, we have to make sure that our children can be very viable citizens in this city. And as Kathy says, be able to be employed.
So that's a great transition. Let's talk about what the new chancellor and mayor, what are one or two things that you think that they should not change, and that there might be, and don't, I mean, there's obvious ones, but pick one that they might be tempted to change, that they should resist the urge to come in and change, and then we'll go to things that you think they maybe should change.
I have to say, I'm not here to defend Michael Bloomberg or Joel Klein or the administration. But I do want to say it takes my breath away for people to be so dismissive of the system that they inherited and the system that they're giving back. It strikes me as really odd. Ernie, I hope you're going to forgive me. When they took over the system, the truth was, it was a remarkably dysfunctional bureaucracy that no one ever thought could be turned around. Did they do everything perfectly? No. Whenever you change a large organization and you change culture, Of course you're not going to get everything perfectly right. But I believe they have done a couple of things that have been very important. They've invested heavily in choice. I happen to think that charter schools are a great addition to the public school network. They have invested heavily, I believe, in professional development for teachers and principals. They have invested heavily in implementing instructional and curricular practice that will allow the system to grow academically. So I think that if a new mayor comes in and takes all of these changes and just puts them aside, that would really be tragic. I would urge the next administration to choose from the wonderful smorgasbord of things that this administration has done. Do everything you can to sustain some of those good practices and good programs. Me, if I were going to take over the school system, I would look heavily to change the networks. I think the networks have basically failed the children who are ELLs. They have failed the children who are special
Let's quickly define, I'm not sure everyone in the room, networks are one of these things that make my boss's eyes roll, so I assume that
So
it could be insider baseball, but it's actually very important to the school system. It's one of those kind
Ernie, why don't you explain that?
quickly, in like 30 seconds, because they are boring, but they're important.
No, they're not boring. You have to understand something. We have a $24 billion budget,
which grew under Michael Bloomberg from $16 billion to $24 billion.
Okay.
So it's not only that he took over the schools. That's good news.
Well, I don't know. Some of the business folk, return on investment is another issue. I've learned that, I deal with the business folks. I know the terms, return on investment. One of the things that really happened here is that they removed the community superintendent or the superintendent, the educational leader for a group of schools, and they decided to create this thing called a network support unit, where principals supposedly would be able to tap into what they needed as a network. Well, I'm going to be honest, and I don't want any of my members sitting here to be angry with me, but you know what? People need a boss. People need to have somebody to give them a course correction, and whether you're the CEO of a corporation and you have a board that sits around and helps give direction, principals need someone who provides course correction and support. And in the state law, that role is the superintendent. So when they removed that, they then created these networks where people were supposed to go almost like the old restaurants where you used to do one from column A, one from column B, and the networks became this mishmash of resources. When they first were rolled out, we thought we were really going to get specific people who could provide a resource. So if you had a problem with L's, there was someone in your network who was the expert on L's. When you're inside of baseball, L's, English language learners, I'm sorry. If you had a problem with special education students and didn't know how to do that, there was an expert on the network team who could do that. Well, it never quite happened. It got to be a mishmash of everything else.
Listen, it is not a coincidence that the general ed performance in New York City went up. And if you looked at the performance of special ed kids and English language learners, I think 3% it was 9% of the English language learners were proficient under the new state test, and 1% of the special ed kids. It's a disgrace.
Can I give two?
Yeah. Yeah, give us two. Yeah.
I think the most important thing the Bloomberg administration did was really focus on school leaders, on the principals, and put a major emphasis there. And from the business community standpoint, that focus on the principals, on the school leaders, gave them a logic, it gave them a touchstone within the school community of somebody they could work with and talk to. And I think that the failure, or what we haven't done, is really taken that to scale. And Pencil has done a good job with the individual principals and their employers. There are 20-some career and technical education schools that are more or less working, some better than others. working together with employers. The charter schools have done a very good job of engaging the private sector, employer community, and we talked a little bit about PTech and the Software Academy and some other individual efforts. We have to take that to scale. It's not enough that 10%, 20% of the kids are exposed and in schools where the principal really knows how to work with the private sector. We have to take that to scale, and I think we have not done that, and that's the big opportunity for the next administration, for Pencil, and for others. We need to be able to provide effective intermediaries, and I think we have to put much, much closer integration between the education activities, workforce development activities, and economic development activities. Bring those three together structurally so they're really supporting every kid having the opportunity to get educated for college and career.
Well, and I think that you bring up a very important point. The empowering of principals was one of the major early reforms that this administration did, and we don't talk about it as much because it happened now years ago. There
are like 500 graduates of the New York City Leadership Academy who, and many of them I know are here and are part of Pencil Partnerships, and I think that's no accident. And there are others, there are about 80 from the New Leaders Program. There are a cadre of school leaders today that I think have a real good sense of how to work with the private sector, and that's the kind of effort we should be supporting.
But there has been some fallout from that in the empowering of principals and the training of principals. It hasn't worked perfectly. And I think that's what Ernie was touching on with the networks, that part of the issue was empowering them so much that not every, as Ernie was saying earlier, he's more comfortable as an educator, maybe not as a CEO. Now they have to be the CEO, they've got to be the operations manager, they've got to be the academic leader, and they've got to deal with the payroll. I mean, they have so many responsibilities that you often talk to principals and they say, I'm not good at all of these things, and a few of them are falling apart.
Well, Lindsey, yes, we love the idea of being empowered.
I'm sure.
But you don't chuck the whole thing.
But no,
you fix it.
Why do you think we're going to do that now? I have not said get rid of anything. I said we need to have a discussion and a conversation. I love the idea of principal empowerment. When we first started talking about this, you had to earn the right to be empowered, which meant you showed that you knew how to do certain things, and all of a sudden everybody became empowered. And the problem was that there was not an infrastructure to support people who were not ready for that. Within the union, we created something called the Executive Leadership Institute. Charlotte Frank sits on our board. Why? Because we knew that we had prepared and helped our folks to be ready to do the work. Not a blame, but ready to do the work, because everybody comes at this very differently. The reason I had a problem with the networks, instead of it being the support, sometimes it became a burden. So I'm empowered. I don't really understand budget, but I need to be able to have someone to show me how to do the budget. I understand curriculum and instruction, but I have problems sometimes dealing with other adults and having meaningful conversations about the work that they do. Now, in the private sector, that's always an issue. That's why we have HR folks who have those conversations, because the CEO doesn't always do that well. So that's all we're saying. Help us to be empowered. But then if I'm empowered, I need to be able to have control over the things at the ground level that I need to be able to do. My budget, especially. And one of the things that we found out, and this is where the credibility got tested here, is that whenever there was a shortcoming citywide, they would go into the schools and take from you without asking you what could they take. Or in the middle of somebody said in the middle of the night. Yes, because you're empowered, but you're not empowered. And so there was some really look, I'm the first one to say that I had a great relationship with Joel Klein. I have a great relationship with Mike Bloomberg. And Dennis and I go back many, many years. When they're right, they're right. But when I think that they're not remembering to focus on the role that the principal needs to play, and how do you support the principal to support teaching, facilitation of teachers, to provide learning for children, then we've got to miss.
Merryl, what do you?
Your point was about the superintendent.
Well, because
Well, yeah.
the superintendents are the ones who can have this bridge. For instance, if you're a superintendent and you know that that school needs some help, you're now the principal's boss. You say to the principal, I've heard what you're trying to do. This ain't working. Do this, and let's see if this works. That's what you do in the corporation. You have vice presidents, but if somebody's not quite doing it, don't you bring them in and say, I hear where you're going with this. I've let you try to do this. Try this instead, and then let's have a conversation about how it goes. But I'm going to provide the support for you to be successful. And what we find sometimes is that principals are floundering out there without the support to be successful. And that's all I'm saying about help people to be successful. Utilize those resources. And you need to have someone who's in charge of the ship to say, I walked through this place and they need this. You do that.
Merrill, you're shaking your head.
Listen, I think principals need to be instructional leaders because that's what we need to focus on in school buildings. And to the extent that principals are not prepared to be instructional leaders, the whole system breaks down. And principals need to be supported in the other work that they need to do. So I think that's really what's going on. Principals feel abandoned in the field. Teachers feel abandoned. Everyone feels under attack. The problem is that the working relationship between the district and management has broken down to a point that it is just impossible to move forward. It's become very toxic. And I think that needs to be dealt with. But to say that great work hasn't gone on in a city school system for this past dozen years is really to diminish what I think is saving the largest public school system. They saved the largest public school system in the country.
Who says that great work hasn't gone on? I think the people
You should come with me to some of these meetings.
No.
Well, I want to see what happens.
Let's not talk about the fringe people. The people who know this business know that a lot of things have been accomplished in the 12 years that we've had this administration. There's no one in this room who would say nothing has been accomplished. Yeah, we probably could have done things differently. Well, you know, we're all a bunch of school leaders, and we all think we know more than everybody else anyway. We probably would have done it differently. But I don't think anyone in this room would say that there hasn't been great things that have been done. And I think, yes, you go, because I hear it also, because you go to some of these meetings, oh, this has been lousy. Let's not go there.
Yeah, there's a lot of noise.
A lot of noise.
But let's give you a chance. Let's give you a chance as the audience to see what you think. Questions? Immediately. We have microphones coming around, so obviously the caveat that always holds with questions is that they must be questions, not statements. So please just introduce yourself, say who you are, where you're from, your connection to pencil perhaps, and ask your question.
My name is Megan Lucas. I'm with the Estee Lauder Companies, and we have been a partner of Pencil's for as long as Pencil has been Pencil. And, I'm thinking it's very important for all of us to hear what you guys are saying here today. But as a Pencil partner, as a longtime Pencil partner, and as somebody who cares greatly about our children's education, there are some very conflicting messages about how we, as business partners, can actually help. So, I count on Pencil to guide me in that, but I think this is a very difficult time because we were already hearing that the schools were teaching to the tests. But when I hear that these students are graduating without the English language and math skills, I think maybe teaching to the test isn't such a terrible thing. Here I'm hearing that we need to be forward-thinking. We need to be forward-thinking. But without those basic, as an employer, without those basic English language skills, I think I can't hire this person no matter how much they know. So try to bring it together for us. We don't know everything you know. What we need to know is what can we do? What's the one or two things that we can do to help make a difference at this point in time with this transition, with everything that the principals are dealing with, the reality of the statistics? What can we do to make a difference?
Well, I'll start. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
number one, Common Core is a basic of what we need to do. Good education is good education. So yes, we need to start to make sure that our children are getting the experiences they need from a curriculum that's helping them to move from where they are to where they need to be. Number one. What our partners need to be able to do is help us by supporting the school leaders and the things that they need to do. Getting the communication done. I've seen how some of the partners really work on communication in their schools. So you see the parent involvement there, and you'll find that places where the partner has really worked on empowering parents, engaging the parents, you don't have some of the problems that you have here. And I don't think sometimes we can be something to everyone, everything to everyone. Sometimes we need to find out what our little niche is and build it from that perspective.
Yeah, I think support for efforts. Last year, the state commissioner, John King, attempted to provide some flexibility in the Regents exams so that the tests would, in a career and technical education, that you would drop one of the general Regents, he said world history, and instead let somebody take a test in the technical competency area that they were working in, which was a practical way of balancing the kinds of skills that employers could be very engaged in supporting with the general liberal education. And he was denounced by everybody.
Everybody.
The New York Post wrote editorials against it.
Yep.
And that's how,
Really?
that's my definition of everybody. And the upshot is that thought didn't go forward. I mean, employers should be
We're coming back, Kathy.
What?
We're coming
Well,
back.
I'm saying employers should be fighting for that kind of practical action, bringing the real world into the school conversation again and again and again.
I'm going to just move on just because we're really tight on time. Get maybe one or two more questions in. One more.
Thank you. Do you know Chair Lambert? I'm the principal of Aviation High School in New York City, in Queens. I do have a lot of questions, but I'm going to hold those back. I'll make a statement instead. First of all,
She said only questions.
Only.
well, I'll come to that too.
We've got 1 minute.
1 minute? Well, then I can pass because I'll take more than a minute.
It's too complicated?
Yes.
As a principal?
First of all, I do think that the work that's been done over the 12 years has been fantastic. We have moved forward, and I'm very passionate. And I'm in education because I believe that every child deserves an opportunity to succeed. Every child in New York City or New York State. And we have given us, in part, to have a kid get 75 in English and 80 in math and call him college ready. I don't believe that. It takes a lot more to be college ready than just passing a Regents with 75 or 80. And that's our job, to challenge these kids, to get them there. And I think we've done a great job. I think the Common Core is fantastic. We've been in the pilot program for 3 years now. I think it works great if the people are prepared to implement it. And I think Danielson is fantastic. It's a great tool to help teachers, and everybody else. But it has to be implemented properly to do that. And I think what the Chancellor said a minute ago about we have come a long way, but we need to stop the tactic from stopping the progress. Is we cannot become the U.S. Congress. We need our leaders to come together to push us forward, because right now, what I hear from teachers and from many schools, I spoke to Sterling Robertson last week about this, teachers are afraid. They are scared because they feel that the message that's come from the state, from the federal government, is we're going to get you. We need our leaders from the state, from the federal government to come together with a common message. This is to help teachers, to help students.
And
that's what this program is.
I think
we need to get that through.
And I think that's exactly why we're all here today.
Because it's not getting through right now. It really is not getting through right now. And people are really scared. I have a school that's a great school. I have a great relationship. Even my teachers feel that we are trying to get them through the state.
Which is exactly what's so wonderful with what Pencil's doing. I think are we done? We are done. So that was an excellent way of summarizing from an educator who's been a longtime pencil partner on why everybody is here today, and all of the back and forth could be more constructive, and is more constructive than obviously the U.S. Congress, thank goodness, low bar. But that it has, as Merryl said at the end, it has turned toxic in many ways with the current administration, and whether that takes away perhaps from what the many accomplishments, we are about to have a big change, and everybody in here will be part of kind of making that next transition smooth. So I really appreciate Pencil having us here.